There is a town in the highlands of Ethiopia where the ground itself is the architecture. Walk across a field of red volcanic rock, and without warning, the earth opens beneath your feet. A church 10 meters deep, carved entirely from a single block of stone. No walls were built here, no stones were stacked. Everything you see was removed, chipped away, day and night, until a cathedral emerged from a mountain. This is Lalibela, and according to Ethiopia's own written record, a sacred biography known as the Gadla Lalibela, preserved for centuries by the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, this city was not simply designed by a king, it was shown to him in heaven by God himself. Today, we tell the story the way Ethiopia has told it for 800 years, from a jealous brother's poison to a soul carried past the gates of heaven, to an army of angels who worked through the night so that 11 churches could rise where none had stood before. Welcome to Axum Code. Before it carried the name it carries today, this town in Ethiopia's Lasta highlands was known as Roha, capital of the Zagwe dynasty, a line of Christian kings who ruled the Ethiopian highlands for roughly 300 years. It sits high in the Amhara region at nearly 2,600 meters above sea level. Today it remains a market town for the surrounding highland communities and, above all, a destination for pilgrims, thousands of them, arriving on foot and by bus for the great feasts of the Ethiopian Orthodox calendar. At its heart lies a complex of 11 churches carved directly out of the volcanic bedrock. The Gadla Lalibela, the hagiography of the king written by the monks who came after him, states plainly that the construction was carved from stone with the help of angels. Centuries later, the Portuguese priest Francisco Alvarez, visiting in the 1520s, recorded what the priests of Lalibela told him directly, that the construction had taken 24 years. This is Ethiopia's own account of its own holiest site, and it begins not with the churches, but with a birth, a swarm of bees, and a jealous brother. To understand how this city came to be, you have to go back to a single birth and a swarm of bees. According to the Gadla Lalibela, the prince who would give this city his name was born to John Seyum, governor of the province of Bugna, and a mother named Kirwerna. At his birth, the story goes, a swarm of bees surrounded the infant, and rather than sting him, they gathered peacefully around him. His mother took this as a divine sign and named her son Lalibela. In the Agau language, the bees recognize his sovereignty. At the time, Lalibela's half-brother Harbai already sat on the Zagwe throne, and as the prophecy surrounding the young prince spread, Harbai grew afraid of him. Threatened by what the bees were said to foretell, Lalibela left the royal court altogether and withdrew into the mountains of Tigray to live as a hermit. It was there, in that period of exile, that he met the woman who would become his wife, Meskel Kibra, Glory of the Cross, who would later be canonized as a saint in her own right by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. From Tigray, tradition holds, Lalibela undertook the long and dangerous pilgrimage north to Jerusalem, a journey devout Ethiopians had made for generations to pray at the holiest sites of Christianity. But Harbai's fear of his brother never faded. According to the Gadla, he moved against Lalibela directly, poisoning him. The poison did not kill him. Instead, Lalibela fell into a coma so deep that his family believed him dead. For 3 days, his body lay still. And in the Ethiopian telling, it was during those 3 days that everything changed. Lalibela's soul, the Gadla says, was lifted from his body and carried by angels up through the levels of heaven. There, God showed him a city unlike anything on earth, churches carved not from stone, but seeming to glow with light itself. And God gave him an order: return to the world of the living and build this city in Ethiopia, so that his people would have a new Jerusalem of their own, one they would not need to risk their lives to reach, now that the true Jerusalem had fallen to Saladin and the crusading wars in 1187. Before sending him back, tradition adds, Lalibela was baptized in the waters of a heavenly river Jordan, the very name he would later give to the modest stream running through his own capital. When Lalibela woke, the poison had failed and his purpose was clear. Soon after, whether from guilt, from fear, or, as the Ethiopian Church later taught, by the direct command of Christ, Harbe stepped down from the throne. Lalibela was crowned, taking the throne name Gebra Meskel, servant of the cross, and began the work he had been shown in his vision. So how does a story like that end in 11 churches carved from solid rock? Ethiopia's own tradition has an answer. Here is how that tradition explains what outsiders have puzzled over for centuries, how 11 churches, each carved from a single mass of solid rock, came to exist at all. The Gadla Lalibela says the Lord did not simply command the king, he showed him how. In his vision, Lalibela was shown the very tools he would need to shape stone into sanctuary, and was promised that God's angels would come to his aid, working through the night to complete what human hands alone could not finish in a lifetime. And so, the tradition holds, King Lalibela's stonemasons labored through the day, cutting down into the red volcanic rock of Roha with hammer and chisel, tracing the outline of a church, cutting the trench that would free it from the surrounding mountain, then hollowing the interior into naves, columns, and vaulted chambers. Each night, when the human workers went home to rest, a second workforce is said to have arrived, an army of angels who took up the same tools and continued carving by their own light, moving, some versions of the story say, at many times the pace of any mortal laborer. Each morning, the masons are said to have found work already done that should have taken them weeks. It's why to this day, priests at Lalibela will tell visitors that these churches were not merely built, they were revealed, chipped away layer by layer until the divine city God had shown the king in heaven stood finished on earth, at the pace only a partnership between human and angelic hands could achieve. Whatever explanation a visitor brings with them, the physical result is not in dispute. Churches carved downward from a single block of stone, with no seams, no added material, and no equal anywhere else in the Christian world. Let's walk the complex the way a pilgrim would, cluster by cluster. Bet Medhane Alem, House of the Savior of the World. The giant of the complex, and by tradition, the starting point of the whole vision. It's widely called the largest monolithic church on Earth, a structure that looks more like a great colonnaded temple than a typical church, ringed by rows of massive pillars. Inside rests the Lalibela cross, one of the site's most venerated relics. A tunnel leads directly from here into the next courtyard, tying the church physically to the rest of the northern cluster. Bet Mariam, House of Mary. Widely believed to be the oldest church at Lalibela, and some traditions describe it as a symbolic echo of the tombs of Adam and Christ. It's also the most visually rich of the 11, the one place where original painted scenes still survive on the ceilings and columns, biblical stories rendered in color that has faded only slightly across 8 centuries. Inside stands a carved pillar said to record the story of the church's own construction alongside the 10 Commandments. Tradition holds it once glowed with its own light until it was veiled from view in the 16th century and has remained hidden ever since. An exterior frieze of horsemen is sometimes identified by local guides as King Lalibela himself. Bet Meskel, House of the Cross. A small chapel sharing a courtyard with Bet Golgotha Michael and Bet Donegel. modest in scale compared to its neighbors, but part of the same sacred cluster gathered around the king's own resting place. Bet Danagel, House of Virgins. The smallest of the 11 churches, tucked into the same courtyard. Ethiopian tradition connects it to 50 young Christian maidens martyred under the Roman Emperor Julian the Apostate, centuries before Lalibela's own reign. A memory the king is said to have wanted preserved permanently in stone, so their courage and faith would never be forgotten. Bet Golgotha Michael, House of Golgotha and Michael. Actually 2 churches sharing a single entrance, forming one semi-monolith. It's known for something rare here, carved human figures on its interior walls, in a complex where most churches carry only geometric ornamentation. Tradition holds it contains King Lalibela's own tomb, sealed inside a small chapel that remains closed to non-clergy visitors to this day, meaning even the most devoted pilgrims must take the priest's word for what lies inside. Standing apart from both clusters is the church most people picture when they hear the name Lalibela, Bet Georgis, the Church of St. George. Ethiopian tradition tells us that when King Lalibela had nearly finished the churches shown to him in his vision, St. George, Ethiopia's own patron saint, appeared before him in full armor, mounted on a white horse, and rebuked him. Not one of the 11 churches, the saint pointed out, had been dedicated to him. Mortified, Lalibela promised to build him something finer than all the rest, and Bet Georgis was the result. The last of the churches carved, and to many eyes the most perfectly proportioned, cut in the shape of a Greek cross, so precise it has become the enduring symbol of the entire site. To this day, guides at Lalibela point out marks in the rock near the church's entrance, said to be the hoofprints of St. George's horse, left, tradition says, when the saint returned in person to witness his church completed. Across the River Jordan lies Lalibela's second great cluster. Bet Emmanuel, House of Emmanuel. The most finely carved of all 11 churches, and the only fully freestanding monolith in the southern group. Tradition holds it may have served as a private royal chapel. Its 4 facades faithfully copy the old Axolite building style of stacked wooden beams and mortar, reproduced entirely in solid rock. Hermit cells are cut into the soft stone nearby, and in some long-abandoned niches, old bones remain visible to this day. A carved staircase leads to an upper gallery, though access to it is currently restricted. Bet Kudus Mercurius, House of St. Mercurius, honors a Coptic martyr of the early church, tortured and killed under a Roman emperor generations before Lalibela's time. The approach here is unforgettable, a 35-meter tunnel walked in complete darkness that pilgrims describe as a deliberate test of faith. You walk blind until the light of the church itself appears ahead. It's also the most damaged of the 11 churches today, its shape irregular where sections have partly collapsed over the centuries. Bet Abba Libanus, House of Abbot Libanus, named for a well-known saint of the era and carved into a vertical cliff face rather than a flat rock surface, visitors often compare it to Petra. Only its roof stays joined to the mountain above. The other 3 sides are freed by narrow carved tunnels. Ethiopian oral tradition credits its construction not to the king himself, but to Queen Meskel Kibra, built, some versions say, in a single night with angelic help, as a memorial to her husband. Oddly, though it appears large from the outside, the interior is quite small and intimate. Bet Gabriel Raphael, House of Gabriel and Raphael, a 2-story building with unusual windows, its entrance flanked by a dramatic sliver of rock local guides call the Way to Heaven. High walls and a trench that fills with rainwater give it an imposing approach. Local tradition remembers it as combining two roles rarely found together, a house of prayer and a place of royal refuge, possibly linked to a sacred bakery that once served the site. Bet-Lem, House of Holy Bread. Reached by a long tunnel from Abba Libanus, this is less a full church than a small monastic chamber. Tradition remembers it as the king's own quiet retreat, a private space for prayer, set apart from the more public churches nearby. 800 years after the Gadla Lalibela says these churches were revealed to a king in a vision, Lalibela remains exactly what it was built to be, a place of active worship, not a ruin frozen in time. A community of Ethiopian Orthodox priests and monks still lives and prays here, continuing a tradition unbroken since the 12th century. King Lalibela himself was canonized by the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church and commemorated each year on the 12th of Sene, June 19th by the Western calendar. Pilgrims gather here in tens of thousands during major feast days, above all during Gena, Ethiopian Christmas, celebrated on January 7th. In 1978, the wider world formally recognized what Ethiopian pilgrims had known for 8 centuries when UNESCO inscribed Lalibela as a World Heritage Site. That recognition has brought new visitors, new resources for preservation, and a modern responsibility to protect a monument that, in the eyes of the church that built it, was never meant to be a monument at all. It was meant to be Jerusalem, close enough for anyone to reach. For centuries, this story has been carried not by archaeologists, but by the church that lived it, passed from priest to priest, told at the mouth of every tunnel and inside every carved chapel, exactly as the Gadla Lalibela set it down generations ago. A prince poisoned by his own brother, a soul carried to heaven, a city shown in a vision and built, the tradition insists, with the help of hands not entirely human. Whether you come to Lalibela as a pilgrim or simply as a witness, the 11 churches remain standing exactly as Ethiopia's own sacred history says they were meant to, cut from a single mountain into a new Jerusalem that needed no ship, no desert crossing, and no permission from anyone to reach. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to see the next chapter of Africa's biblical and Christian history, subscribe to Axum Code, because this story is far from finished.